What is significant to a Western researcher may not be significant to someone from the global South. Let me give you an example. Water purification. Now, if you are a Western researcher, water purification will use the most sophisticated technology, the most expensive technology. That is the least needed water purification technique for someone from the global South. For them, water purification technique that is cheaper, that is using not the latest technology, but actually works in their social economic environment, is the highest impact technique around. But those papers don't get published. Why? Because every Western editor will look at those papers and go, that's not using the latest technology. We need more inclusive journals, not less.
Welcome to InsightsXchange. I'm your host, Nikesh Gosalia. Here's an interesting fact. Did you know that the concept of trust in research has evolved significantly over the past few decades, particularly as the global research community has become more interconnected and diverse? Today, trust is not just about data accuracy. It's also about transparency, inclusivity, and the equitable sharing of knowledge. This brings us to today's guest, Dr. Ritu Dhand, Chief Scientific Officer at Springer Nature. With a distinguished career that spans groundbreaking cancer research and leadership in scientific publishing, Ritu has been at the forefront of shaping the editorial strategies of high-impact journals like Nature and Nature Communications. She's a passionate advocate for open and inclusive publishing, working to ensure that global research publishing is both equitable and accessible. In this episode, we'll discuss the evolution of trust in research, the challenges of balancing inclusivity with commercial objectives, and the future of global publishing under her visionary leadership. Welcome, Ritu.
Hi, Nikesh. Lovely to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. So I know when we met, we briefly spoke about that, and that was really fascinating. But the benefit of the listeners, your background's a unique blend of hands-on cancer research and editorial expertise in scientific publishing. As someone who's transitioned from a very specific scientific field to broader publishing leadership, what key differences have you noticed between driving research and driving editorial strategies?
I'd say the biggest difference, the key difference is the use of that word strategy. Research is, there's a level of serendipity, there is a level of whose lab you're in and the area you're in. It's very narrow. People tend not to look up, look around, see what's going on in the wider research space. And editorial and publishing is the exact opposite. You have a huge awareness of the research landscape. You have to in order to be able to think ahead and plan ahead. There is an awareness of different trends in research as well as in publishing. And when I was in research, and that was a long time ago now, that was definitely lacking. And even now, when I speak with researchers, even the broader researchers still tend to not have that visibility of what's happening in research at the wider level. For example, and I know we're going to talk about it a little bit later because you've already mentioned it in your introduction, the level of globalization in research that is happening now and the impact it is happening. There is a naivety on part of some researchers of how good some of this research is. And, you know, that I feel is our job to change and to sort of ensure that there is a better understanding.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Just maybe talking very specifically about your experience What strategies helped you manage the transition from being an editor to overseeing broad editorial and research publishing operations and directions?
My wealth is my experience. And I was that researcher. I was that author. I was that reviewer. I have been an editor. I know exactly what it's like. I know what the pain points are. I sympathize. I understand. I want to remove those pain points. I know what drives these individuals, what's important to them. And that has been my, I would say, USP. We are here to serve the research community. And you can only do that if you understand the research community. And so even though I left the bench many, many years ago, I still have contact with researchers and scientists and editors all the time, because this is how we learn. We have to hear the good things as well as the bad things if we want to improve, if we want to have an offering that they want to receive, because we are in the service industry. And whether you work on Nature or you work on a specialist journal, those needs, those goals, those directions, they don't change.
Absolutely. Your leadership has shaped the editorial strategies of so many prominent journals like Nature, Nature Communications. Could you share some key lessons from overseeing such high impact and prestigious publications?
I mean, where will I start? I started working on Nature back in 1999. So when I came to Nature, it was a true black box. Nobody knew what happened inside, and occasionally papers were published. And that's what the outside world saw. And I felt very strongly about opening it up, bringing more transparency into the process so that the researchers could see some of what we can see. Obviously, there is a high level of confidentiality that we share with our authors, but around that, we can be more transparent. And it took me a long time because it was a massive cultural change, internally and externally. But we do have transparent peer review on Nature and some of the research journals and Nature Communications. And I define that as publishing the reviewer reports. They can be named or they can be anonymous. We have reviewer recognition on all our journals, and that is where the reviewers can be named on the paper if they would like to be. And, you know, we went towards open data, publishing, making the supplementary information an integrated part of the paper so that you could actually see all of the data. You know, we were renowned for publishing, I still hear it today, 1,000-word papers, when in fact our papers are much, much longer. And integrating supplementary information allows us to really allow the data to speak for themselves. I think the other thing that's important on journals that are very high impact is maintaining the rigor and integrity, because the number of eyes that see any one paper at a high impact publication is hundreds of thousands. And we cannot get it wrong. And so we should not chase headlines. And that was one of the things that I was absolutely very, very hard on. We're not going to publish a big story unless it's been proven down to the last detail. Because once it's been published in one of our pages, it's gospel. And we can do untold damage to the community by doing that. That's not to say that we don't have retractions on the Nature journals. Obviously we do. But we get accused of chasing headlines, and we will never publish headlines unless we feel they've been verified to the highest level. You talked about trust in your introduction. I cannot tell you how important that is, not only on the major journals, actually. Trust in scientific communication is an absolute, something that we need at the highest level, because if we lose that, we are nothing. We are absolutely nothing. And retractions is an important part of maintaining that trust. As a publisher, not being afraid to retract in order to maintain the integrity of the scientific record is actually the highest caliber of scientific publishing that we can do. Because there will always be retractions, there will always be mistakes, there will likely always be fraudulent papers that somehow get through. And as long as researchers know that publishers aren't afraid to retract, and we are not, then we maintain the integrity. And the last thing I would say for a high-impact journal is staying human. Every new Nature editor I recruited walked through the door thinking that the final published papers was everything that we received at submission. That's just not true. And so keeping everyone grounded, real, and not expecting the moon is also a big part of being on a Nature journal. If one person, one research team or a collaborative research team maintains standards that nobody else will be able to attain for the next 2 years, that does not become the accepted standard, because we know that not everyone has that technology. Not everyone has the means to attain that high level of proficiency that they may have attained. And so making sure that, the standards that we are using are those that can be attained by the global community. And by global, I mean most researchers in that field is also highly important. So those are just a taster of some of the things that were important to me while I was working on the Nature journals.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Ritu. Very practical. And I know, again, when we met, we spoke quite a lot about, your experience, but this is fantastic having done it firsthand. I know you briefly mentioned about trust, and again, not just today, we've spoken about this in the past as well, but with your experience over the last maybe 15, 20 years, how have you seen the concept of trust in research evolve? And because it's the start of a year, what's going to be important going forward in 2025 for this whole community to come together and maybe, maintain that level of trust?
I'm going to go back to when I was at the bench, when I was a researcher, because scientific practice was based on trust. It really was. Things were not, everything didn't have to be shown. Everything didn't have to be written down. If a scientist said I did X, Y, and Z, you believed them. If you look at the DNA helix published by Watson and Crick, there isn't a single data point in that paper. We trusted them. We trusted that they had the structure. Somebody might have gone to a lab to see it, but it wasn't in the paper. That would never happen today. That would never happen. So trust has evolved through a 360 in research at so many different levels. I remember back in the early 2000s when we brought in conflict of interest statements. And I remember thinking, don't we trust our researchers to, not do things that would be a conflict? There are always bad actors. Not at the level, bad actors 30 years ago were individuals who were undertaking fraud. And so the scale was very small. Bad actors now run firms and factories. They prey on the vulnerable, and the scale is hundreds and thousands. And there is a difference, a huge difference. Bad actors 30 years ago still did it for kudos, for scientific kudos. Bad actors today do it for money. And there's always been a conflict of interest with money in science. Maintaining trust is our golden rule at Springer Nature. It has had the most investment put into over the last 2 years because we have to keep up with the bad actors and we have to keep up with our best friend AI, who is writing papers and, submitting data that we didn't even know was possible. And so the investment into platform and structure and, software to spot these papers, to spot these bad actors, that's a daily slog, Not easy anymore, not easy. So I would say in STM publishing, trust is something that you have to invest in. But there's another element of trust, and that's trust in how the public see research. And, a lot of debate and discussion on some of our societal challenges has seen this mixing of researchers and lay public in a way that didn't happen 30 years ago. And so you see, climate change would be the obvious example. And what lay people don't appreciate is that there's never just one answer in a scientific debate. And also, climate change is a prediction. We can't see into the future. We are modeling. So there will be multiple models and multiple answers. And no one has spent the time to explain that to the general public. So when the general public hear different answers or different reasoning, they lose trust because they don't understand that that is a natural progression for science, for things to evolve, for things to change. And I think that conversation needs to happen more. We also saw it during COVID, with different scientists disagreeing with each other. We were all learning at the same time. I still think of myself as a scientist, even though I haven't been near a bench for 30 years. But, as a scientist, I never took what any one person said and said that was gospel. I challenged, I criticized, I thought for myself, I brought in other people's arguments. That's how scientists are taught to think. You don't accept what is said, you critique it. But the lay public aren't taught that. And when you hear, wear a mask, don't wear a mask, send a kid to school, don't send a kid to school. But what is right? What is wrong? Who are these people? They don't know what they're talking about. And then it becomes very easy for bad actors to take center stage and start to say things that are just completely untrue. So I think educating the general public how scientific debate evolves is something that hasn't happened enough and needs to happen if we are to maintain trust in research at the public side.
Absolutely.
I digressed.
No, I think, in fact, I love that, Ritu, because I think there are various facets to this, and it's not just about, like you said, within the community, we have to do a lot more, even with what we call as, general public. And the COVID example was a very valid one. There was just so much information that was floating around. If you were convinced with something, you went and tried that. And how do you then determine and bring about that. So that was, I think, it's absolutely vital. And it's ironic that we've obviously progressed in so many ways, but at the same time, going back to the basics, like you mentioned, it's just become so foundational. I mean, the entire year of 2024 was about integrity, was about going back to the basic editorial practices. There will be advancement in AI, but there has to be a human in the loop. And all of that's become, again, the main narrative as we move ahead. It's just another reminder, I guess, for all of us that, that's just so fundamental to everything we do, irrespective of growth and commercial aspects and whatnot.
Absolutely.
I know that, again, when we have spoken, you and I've seen this through so many of your other presentations and speaking events, Ritu, you've emphasized promoting open and inclusive values in publishing. What does inclusivity mean to you in the context of global research publishing? And how does it influence the editorial policies, say, at Springer Nature?
Yeah, so that is my, I don't want to call it a bandwagon because I don't think I'm ever getting off this one. So, but it's something I feel very, very strongly about. I do define inclusivity as ensuring that every researcher, global North, global, and global South, has a voice in research publishing. And if we go back in time, 20 years ago, research was dominated by Western nations, plus Japan. If you look at the top 20 contributors to research publishing, they were the US of A, UK, Germany, France, Japan. That was the top 5. The top 20 was other Western nations. If you look at that same research landscape today, China is number 1. Not only is it number 1, it's producing almost double what the US of A produces. The US of A is number 2, and number 3 is India. The UK and Germany are at 4th and 5th. And the top 20 is dominated by Western nations, but you still have Japan, Korea, Iran, Turkey. I can't remember the others, but there are other non-Western countries in the top 20 now. And that is evolving so fast that researchers have less of an awareness of the level of diversity that we are now seeing in research publishing. So you have to have been stuck in a vacuum if you don't know that China is producing a lot of research. What people have less of awareness of is the impact of the research. So China actually has the highest proportion of papers in the top 1% highly cited and the top 10% highly cited. US of A and Europe, all the European countries combined, take second and third positions. In different areas, they take different positions. But China has the largest proportion of papers in the top 1 and top 10%. That is phenomenal. You go out there and you ask any researcher which country dominates the top 1 and 10% highly cited, I can guarantee you 99% will not say China. That's appalling. That is appalling. Because that then reflects on how we assess research. And this is where I get really, really upset. Now, because research was dominated by Western nations 20 years ago, most editorial boards, majority of editors are from Western nations. And 20 years ago, that was okay. That was probably the right thing to do. I don't even know if it was the right thing to do, but it was okay. That's where most of the research was being done. Those were the top researchers. That was reflected on all journals, our editorial boards. 70% Western editors. You know, it's very difficult to do this classification, but I've seen quotes of 70 to 80% Western editors on most editorial boards. But that's not reflecting what is happening in the world today at any level, If we don't start to diversify our ed boards, we are keeping voices from the global south out, keeping voices from non-Western nations out. Why? Because we are human. And as humans, we all have biases. We have unconscious biases. We have implicit biases. I have biases. You have your biases. It's what we have read somewhere, and it's usually out of date because it's the last thing that we remember. And as we get older, we remember less. We remember more from distant memory than we do from recent memory. And our implicit biases are shaped by what we know. And if it's out of date, then it's inaccurate. And so when most editors see a paper, and things that we hear ourselves are, oh, I don't recognize the research team. Let me see the institute or the university. Oh, I don't recognize the institutes either. I definitely don't. I know the university, well, I know the country, but I don't recognize the institute or the university. Probably low quality then. And that's your starting point. So if you are unrecognized from, and your country is not recognized as being a pioneer in research, that is that's the starting point. And you will hear, there's a lot of integrity problems in this country. Not sure about this. Or it's too good to be true. It can't possibly be true. Must be fake. Or I don't trust work that's, can't be of high quality if it comes from a global South nation. They're not just thoughts. There are things that I have heard editors say. And because science is so factual, nobody thinks they have any biases. Nobody thinks that there is anything subjective going on in their decision-making. That is problem number 2, because they say, I am assessing the research. You're not just assessing the research. You make a whole number of decisions based on information in your brain that could be out of date that are part of your decision-making. And getting researchers to recognize that is step 1. Because if they don't recognize that, they won't try to learn. So having an open mind, recognizing you have biases, to then trying to better inform and educate yourself on whatever those biases are saying, is the 2-step process. And that needs to happen. We are the end of the process. So we are doing all these courses, trainings, workshops for our editors, trying to get them to recognize their own implicit biases. We have released documents. We have released videos. We have released webinars and workshops on the impact of research in the global landscape, showing them the impact of subdisciplinary research from China. We're going to do a big spotlight on India this year. We are trying to train our editors. We are recruiting diversely. We are trying to have the editors, regional diversity of the editors mirror the regional diversity of submissions, not publications, submissions. Because the bias has already happened if you just look at the publications. So we are doing all of those things, but we are the end of the line. I always say this. We, as publishers, are the end of the line. This needs to happen at home. This needs to happen in research institutes. And the other thing I say is this is not just a Western problem. This is a global problem. Because I will have an editor from China who doesn't recognize a research institute that is best in class from India. And I will have an editor from India who doesn't recognize a research institute that's best in class from China. It's as the world globalizes in research, we need to educate our researchers of a global landscape. And that should start, I'd say it should start in undergraduate, and it should be happening in institutes, and it needs to happen in universities. But we need to be more open, we need to be broader, and we need to stop thinking of a Western universe, or in China, a China universe, or in India, an India universe. We have to think globally.
I love that, Ritu. That's fantastic. Again, very practical, very easy to understand examples, and I fully agree with you. Just to kind of close that point out, is there work that is already happening, do you think, as a community, and we just have to build on it? Or is there like a starting point for all of us to do this? Because very often I see that everyone's quite busy in their own worlds, and rightly so from a certain perspective. But how do we bring these various stakeholders together? Just to share a simple example, I think there's been a few conferences, or I've been reflecting maybe more now over the last couple of years, where I think some of the representation of researchers is not enough. Either it could be bringing in these different voices, it could be from India, it could be China, it could be Japan. I know there are practical challenges around it in terms of, costs and stuff like that, but there could be other ways to manage that. And that's just one example. I feel, Ritu, that I think we've been running certain things in a certain way. There is enough to obviously, talk about and solve. We've all been very busy in our own worlds. So how do we change that? How do we change this?
If we publish the voices, researchers would find them. They would become more aware of them. And the world will change. So the hardest work needs to be done by us. What is an inclusive journal? Inclusive journals have been around for years. They're called other names. They are called sound science journals. They are scientific reports. They are Frontiers. They are MDPI. We have the Discover journals. We have BMC series. Some of our Springer journals are inclusive. But inclusive journals tend to have the most diverse editorial boards. Tend, I say. I haven't done a huge analysis. They certainly do at Springer Nature. But their biggest signifier is that the editors do not make a judgment of significance on the research. If you think about how research is published, for decades, slow volume publishing has become the norm. Why? In the 1900s, when journals were first launched, they were printed, they had to be distributed. Publishers wanted volumes to be low. That's how selective publishing was born. And as we moved on, the impact factor becoming popular in the 70s, an impact factor, you get a higher number if you have a lower volume journal, although that doesn't always hold, we've seen. But that association in editorial and publishing, it worked for the publishers, it kept their costs down. And in editorial, it was thought that if you cream off the top 10 to 20% of all your submissions, if you publish the best, the icing, your journal will be of the highest quality it can be. And that became the norm. 98%, maybe 99%, of our journals, and there's about 50,000 journals in the STM landscape, are selected. That means every single journal is rejecting 80 to 90, sometimes higher, % of the submissions and publishing 5 to 20% of the papers coming in. Inclusive journals are publishing anything upwards of 35%, 35, 45, 55, 65%. Because they don't make a judgment call on significance. Significance is a loaded gun. Let me give you an example. Water purification. Now, if you are a Western researcher, water purification will use the most sophisticated technology, the most expensive technology. It will be the latest kid on the block. No one cares whether it can actually be scaled up because it's so intelligent. That is the least needed water purification technique for someone for the global south. They won't have the infrastructure, the social economic climate to have it integrated. They can't afford it. It's too expensive. Even if someone puts it in for them, they can't maintain it. They just don't have the tools. For them, water purification technique that is cheaper, that is using not the latest technology, but actually works in their social economic environment, is the highest impact water purification technique around. But those papers don't get published. Why? Because every Western editor will look at those papers and go, that's not using the latest technology. That's not the latest scientific advance. We don't need it. We do need it. But it's not being published in the big journals. It will get published, if it's lucky, in one of the more inclusive journals. And then it's not seen. And therefore it's not acted on. And it's also, the other thing is, it's ridiculed because you published in a telephone directory. Why are inclusive journals bigger? Because there's so few of them. If 25,000 of our 50,000 journals were inclusive, they would also be small. Volume does not equal low quality. Volume shows demand and not enough infrastructure to support that demand. That's what volume is showing. And believe me, if we had a lot more inclusive journals, they'd have higher impact factors as well. 33% of all the research that comes from our inclusive journals is directly related to the SDGs, directly. So using dimensions algorithm, it's a neutral algorithm. It assigns each article, whether it's actually addressing one of the SDG questions, over 33%. Now, if that is not an indicator of high impact research, I don't know what is. Research that is addressing our global challenges is vital and important research. And where is it being published? It's being published in our inclusive journals because that's where a lot of researchers get that opportunity to have a voice. We need more inclusive journals, not less.
I know you've spoken about this, but if there is something very specific that comes to your mind, in what ways do you think the responsibilities of the editorial leaders has changed? But I think more importantly, what are some of the emerging challenges that you see ahead and any suggestions in overcoming those? And like I said, I know that you've spoken about some of those, but is there something which you can think of which we've not spoken?
I mean, I can pull the old red herring out of open access and inclusivity and equity, because it doesn't always all go together. In my perfect world, where everyone is equal, open access is the best for research. But in the real world, unless funding bodies and governments actually support open access, it cannot be a reality. So subscription has to stay, because while we can say, oh, it's not fair, there are countries that won't have site licenses, they can still, at least the research can be accessed by more people with the subscription, and everyone has a right to publish in any subscription journal. And that is equity. So they may not be seen by all nations, but it will give every author a voice. And that's step one, because we can't tick step one off yet. Every researcher has a voice. They don't. So the reality of our world is, in order for every researcher to have that voice, and to have a voice where they want to be seen, subscription for now will need to stay. Subscription and transformative agreements is the, bringing more equity, where some researchers are paying and then the research can be seen. Well, universities are paying for their researchers, rather. But there is no perfect answer. There is no perfect world.
This is exactly, to be very honest, this is exactly the kind of conversation, I needed to really, I think the passion with which you're talking about it, and yes, there are many challenges, but at the same time, like you mentioned, there are so many opportunities as well. And, just it's very practical stuff. And so that's how I'm just making notes. And there's so much to reflect on, which I'm going to do. And I'm sure the listeners are going to enjoy this as well. But yeah, moving ahead, I know, again, you've spent so much time being a researcher, but also part of the scholarly publishing industry, specifically Springer Nature. And looking ahead, what legacy do you hope to build at Springer Nature? And what would you most like to be remembered for in the world of, scientific publishing?
I would like to be remembered as a voice for global equity, obviously, inclusivity and all of that. It's something I feel very, very strongly about. The other thing that I haven't spoken about that I also feel very strongly about is community. And researchers have communities, editors have communities, opinion leaders have communities, different communities. But I want to see those communities come together. I want to see researchers, editors, reviewers, where they are joined by commonalities, cores, in different things. It could be in subject areas. It could be they're all early researchers. It could be that they are leaders established in the field. But to share that knowledge at the level of a community, that we could be so much bigger, so much more effective as communities. If we stop siloing, if we stop fighting with each other and we come together and we build together, because then we can climb all those mountains together. And that is another pet project of mine, which you'll see it's happening on Springer Nature now. We're building communities. We've put up 42 subject communities already, so they cover the major subdisciplines. We are adding our editors to the same communities. We will be adding reviewers to the same communities. We will be adding our own publishers to the same communities. And we're creating these big mixing pots of people with different hats, but who share common goals. And you can have different communities for different things, but with all the different hats. And I hope to see magic happen there. I'm sure I will be inspired by what I see. I know I'm going to learn from these communities, but I I also hope that we can achieve much bigger things by coming together, working together, learning from each other, and then building together.
Love that. Absolutely. And obviously when this develops more and when we speak in the future, Ritu, it'll be interesting to see some of the developments you spoke about, which is the community building and involving reviewers, involving editorial boards. And so looking forward to that. Because it's that time of the year, the start of the year, Ritu, final question from my side. Is there one particular trend that you're most excited about, for this year, and one which concerns you? I don't know if it keeps you up at night, but, something that you kind of, worried about.
Paper mills keep me up at night. That is a concern. Excites me. Everything I've spoken about excites me. All the work we're doing towards global diversity and inclusivity excites me. It inspires me. I get out of bed in the morning. I want to go to work. I'm in my dream job. I've been doing this now for 25 years, and I still love it. I genuinely, people say you talk with so much passion because I love it. It's not hard for me to feel excited by what I do because I think we can make a difference. And we are in a position where if we work together, we will make a difference. And that, just knowing that, inspires me to try harder. It's a privilege, it's an honor, it's a gift to be in a position where we can make a difference. And I want to use that. So everything excites me, Nikesh.
I absolutely love that, Ritu. I must say that, I've been with one organization for the last 17 years, and I share the same passion. I wake up in the morning. I would love to try and make a difference. I love the freedom that is given. There is so much trust. And we can do so much more. And that's exactly like I said, that's what, not just me, but I think, the listeners need at the start of the year, because you can get caught up in this negative, spiral, so as to speak, right? There's, what's going to happen with the commercial aspects, what's going to happen with paper mills and so many other things, Ritu. And I think, but at the same time, if we all come together and if we start to systematically, talk about it to start with, and then start to resolve, somebody takes the first step, and that becomes an inspiration for the others, I think a lot can be done. And I'm so happy to hear some of that. And like I said, perfect timing in terms of start of a year. And so thank you for sharing that. And it's just come out so naturally with so much passion, Ritu. So, I really, really appreciate that.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute joy. Thank you.
This has been an insightful conversation with Dr. Ritu Dhand. From her reflections on the evolution of trust in research to her vision for a far more inclusive and equitable publishing landscape, Ritu has provided us with invaluable perspectives on the future of scholarly communication. A heartfelt thank you to Ritu for joining us and sharing her journey, her expertise, and outlook on what it takes to lead in the ever-changing world of scientific publishing. In our next episode, we'll continue to explore thought-provoking ideas with another trailblazing guest. Thank you for tuning into Insights Exchange, where we challenge the status quo and inspire new ways of thinking. See you next time.